winter we lost everything. Marcus found the girls sitting outside in the snow without their coats, waiting to hear if they still had a home, and he realized that no matter what the judge decided, he'd already failed at the one job Jennifer had trusted him with, keeping them safe. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, and his hands trembled as he gripped the custody papers, not from the bitter January cold that cut through his wool coat, but from the weight of what he'd just agreed to do. What he'd fought for, what he'd nearly lost. 24 hours earlier, his life had hung by a thread. Marcus Chen had been married to Jennifer for 7 years. They'd met at a corporate law firm in downtown Boston. Two ambitious attorneys who bonded over late nights reviewing contracts and a shared addiction to terrible coffee. Jennifer had 2 daughters from her first marriage, Emma, now 7, and Sophie, 5, and when Marcus married their mother, he'd fallen completely in love with both girls. He'd taught Emma to ride a bike, had been there for Sophie's first day of kindergarten, had kissed scraped knees and read bedtime stories and fought monsters under the bed. But he wasn't their father, not legally, not biologically. Their real father, Daniel, lived in California with his new wife and rarely called, content to send child support checks twice a month and consider his parental duties fulfilled. And now Jennifer was gone. The accident had happened on a Tuesday, a patch of black ice on Interstate 95, a moment of lost control, and then the unthinkable. The doctors said she died instantly, that she hadn't suffered. Marcus wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. He'd been the one to identify her body, the one to call her parents, the one to somehow find the words to tell 2 little girls that their mommy wasn't he coming home. But the worst moment, the moment that had broken something fundamental inside him, had come at the hospital, 3 hours after the accident. Marcus had been sitting in the waiting room, numb with shock, when a police officer approached him with a clipboard. "Mr. Chen, I'm very sorry for your loss. We need to contact the children's biological family. You're listed as the stepfather, so you're not their legal next of kin. Do you have contact information for their father or grandparents?" The words had hit him like a second collision. You're not their legal next of kin. He'd been married to their mother for 7 years. He'd been the one to rush Emma to the emergency room when she broke her arm falling off the monkey bars. He'd been the one to stay up all night with Sophie when she had pneumonia, monitoring her breathing every 15 minutes. He was the one who knew that Emma was allergic to penicillin and that Sophie had a heart murmur that had to be checked annually. But according to the state of Massachusetts, he was nobody. A footnote. An ex-husband with no legal standing. The funeral had been a blur of black clothing and pitying looks and casseroles from neighbors who didn't know what else to do. Jennifer's parents, the girls' biological grandparents, had flown in from Arizona, their faces masks of grief and barely concealed calculation. Marcus had known immediately what they were thinking. He'd seen it in the way they looked at him, in their whispered conversations that stopped when he entered the room, in how they'd started positioning themselves between him and the girls. The conversation had come 3 days after the burial. "Marcus, we need to talk about the girls' future," Jennifer's mother, Patricia, had said, her voice careful and measured. They were sitting in the living room of the house he'd shared with Jennifer, surrounded by sympathy cards and wilting flowers. Emma and Sophie were upstairs, supposedly napping but probably listening through the heating vents like they always did. "What about their future?" Marcus had asked, though he already knew. "Well, their future living arrangements," Patricia continued, glancing at her husband, Robert, for support. "We think it might be best if they came to live with us in Arizona." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What? No, this is their home. I'm their stepfather," Robert interrupted, his tone not unkind but firm. "You were their stepfather, and we appreciate everything you've done for them, truly. But we're their blood relatives, their grandparents, and legally speaking, you have no claim to them." Marcus had felt the room spin. "No claim? I've been raising them for 7 years. I'm the one who takes them to school every morning. I know that Emma hates peas but loves broccoli, and that Sophie can't sleep without her stuffed elephant, Mr. Trunks. I know Emma's best friend is a boy named Tyler, who she insists is just a friend but clearly has a crush on, and that Sophie is scared of the dark but won't admit it because she wants to be brave like her big sister. I know all of this because I'm their parent." "You were married to their parent," Patricia said gently. "That's different. The hell it is." "Marcus, please," Robert said, standing up. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to do what's best for the girls. They've just lost their mother. They need stability, and they need to be with family. I am their family." But the law didn't see it that way. Without Jennifer's explicit wishes documented and she'd been only 34, why would she have thought to make such arrangements? Marcus had no legal standing. He wasn't an adoptive parent, He was just the man who'd been married to their mother, and now that she was gone, he was nothing in the eyes of the court. A stranger. An ex-husband with no rights to the children he'd helped raise. The next week had been a nightmare of lawyers and phone calls and desperate legal research. Marcus had spent every penny of his savings trying to find a way to keep the girls, to prove that he deserved to be their parent. But every attorney told him the same thing. Step-parents have very limited rights, especially when biological grandparents want custody. The only chance he had was if he could prove the grandparents were unfit, which they clearly weren't, or if they voluntarily agreed to let him have custody. Neither seemed likely. His law partner, David, had been blunt. "Marcus, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but you need to prepare yourself. The courts favor biological relatives, unless those grandparents have criminal records or the girls explicitly state they're afraid of them. You're fighting an uphill battle, maybe an impossible one. So what am I supposed to do? Just let them take Emma and Sophie to Arizona? Let them rip these kids away from the only stable home they've ever known? I'm saying you need to be realistic about your chances." But Marcus couldn't be realistic. Being realistic meant giving up, and giving up meant losing the two people who gave his life meaning. So he'd kept fighting, kept searching for legal precedents, kept hoping for a miracle. And then something unexpected happened. Emma, his quiet, thoughtful 7-year-old, had done something remarkable. She'd written a letter to the judge, in her careful second-grade handwriting, explaining why she and Sophie needed to stay with Marcus. She'd described how he made them pancakes every Sunday, with chocolate chips arranged in smiley faces, how he helped with homework even though he admitted he'd forgotten most of his multiplication tables, how he did silly voices for all the characters when he read to them at bedtime, how he never once made them feel like they weren't his real daughters. "Marcus is our dad," Emma had written, underlining the words 3 times. "Our other dad lives far away and doesn't know us. Marcus knows us. Please don't make us leave him. We already lost our mommy. Please don't make us lose our daddy too." The letter had been accompanied by a crayon drawing from Sophie, showing the 3 of them holding hands, with the words, "My family," written across the top in backward letters. When the judge read these documents in chambers, with Marcus and the grandparents present, the room had fallen silent. Patricia had started crying. Robert had looked away, his jaw clenched. The judge, a woman named Catherine Morrison, who'd been on the bench for 20 years and had seen every kind of custody case imaginable, had looked at the grandparents over her reading glasses. "Mr. and Mrs. Westbrook," she'd said quietly, "I want you to understand something. Legally, you have every right to take these children. The law is on your side. But I'm going to ask you to consider whether the law is always the same as what's right." She'd slid Emma's letter across the desk. "These children have lost their mother. That's a trauma they'll carry for the rest of their lives. The question you need to ask yourselves is whether adding another loss, the loss of the only father figure who's been consistently present in their lives, is really in their best interest." The hearing had been scheduled for the following day, but Patricia had called Marcus that evening. "We've been talking," she'd said, her voice thick. "Robert and we've been so focused on what we lost our daughter that we forgot to think about what the girls are losing, or what they could lose." Marcus had held his breath. "If you want custody," Patricia continued, "we won't fight you. Jennifer loved you and she trusted you with her daughters. That should have been enough for us from the beginning. We were wrong to try to take them from you." Marcus had broken down crying on the phone, unable to speak for nearly a minute. "But," Patricia added, her voice firmer, "we want to be part of their lives. We want regular visits, holidays, summers. We want to be their grandparents, even if we're not their guardians." "Of course," Marcus had managed to say. "Always. You're their family too." So now, 24 hours later, Marcus stood outside the courthouse with legal custody of Emma and Sophie Chen. Morrison. Jennifer had hyphenated her name when they married, and the girls had done the same. He was their legal guardian now, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. He could make medical decisions, sign school forms, take them on vacations. He was their father in every sense that mattered, both legally and otherwise. But the relief he felt was tempered by the crushing reality of what lay ahead. He drove home slowly, watching the snow accumulate on his windshield wipers, trying to figure out how he was going to do this. How does a single parent, especially one who works 60-hour weeks at a law firm, raise 2 traumatized young girls? How do you help children grieve their mother when you're barely holding yourself together? How do you make pancakes and pack lunches and remember permission slips and attend parent-teacher conferences and somehow still pay the mortgage? When he pulled into the driveway, he saw them waiting at the window, 2 small faces pressed against the glass, watching for him. Patricia and Robert had been staying at the house, helping with the girls while the legal matters were sorted out. They'd be flying back to Arizona tomorrow, leaving Marcus alone with his new reality. He got out of the car, and the front door burst open. Emma and Sophie came running out into the snow without coats, their faces anxious and hopeful and scared all at once. That, when it hit him the full weight of his responsibility. They'd been so worried, so terrified of losing another parent, that they hadn't even thought to grab their jackets. They were freezing, literally and figuratively, waiting to hear whether their world would shatter again. And he'd let them sit there, exposed to the cold, waiting in terror. What kind of father did that make him? Well? Emma asked, her voice small, her lips already turning blue. What did the judge say? Marcus knelt down in the snow, pulling both girls into his arms. They were shivering violently from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Probably both. The judge said, Marcus told them, his voice thick with emotion, that you two are stuck with me, if that's okay with you. Sophie threw her arms around his neck so hard she nearly knocked him over. Yes, 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 yes. Emma was crying, but she was smiling too. Does this mean we get to stay home? We don't have to move to Arizona? This is your home, Marcus confirmed, hugging them tighter. This will always be your home. I promise. But what about Grandma and Grandpa? Sophie asked, suddenly worried. Will we still see them? Of course you will. They're going to visit all the time, and you'll go see them too. They love you very much. We all do. Patricia appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Marcus, get those girls out of the snow before they freeze to death. What kind of parent are you? It was said with affection, even humor, and Marcus actually laughed for the first time in 2 weeks. You're freezing, he said to the girls. Who did this to you? Who let you run outside without coats in the middle of winter? Emma giggled through her tears. You did, Daddy? Daddy! The word hit him like a warm wave. They'd called him Marcus before, or sometimes Dad Marcus to distinguish him from their biological father. But just Daddy, that was new. That was real. Well, your daddy is an idiot, he said, standing up and herding them back toward the house. Let's get you two inside before we all turn into popsicles. That night, after Patricia and Robert had gone to bed in the guest room and the girls were supposedly asleep in their shared bedroom, Marcus sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the custody papers. He thought about all the challenges ahead, the therapy appointments he'd need to schedule for the girls, the grief counseling he probably needed himself, the career adjustments he'd have to make to be more present in their lives, the 1,000 daily decisions he'd now be making alone. He thought about Jennifer, about how unfair it was that she wasn't here to raise her own daughters. He thought about how scared he was, how completely unqualified he felt for this enormous responsibility. And then he heard small footsteps on the stairs. Emma appeared in the doorway, Mr. Trunks tucked under her arm, Sophie's elephant, which meant Sophie had probably sent her big sister on a reconnaissance mission. Can't sleep? Marcus asked. Emma shook her head and climbed into his lap, something she'd been too old for until grief had made her young again. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, sweetheart. Really, I'm terrified. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this admission. But you're the grown-up. Grown-ups aren't supposed to be scared. That's a dirty secret about grown-ups, Marcus told her. We're scared all the time. We're just better at pretending we're not. So what do we do when we're scared? Marcus held her closer. We do it anyway. We be brave even when we're scared, and we hold on to each other and we get through it together. All three of us? All three of us. Emma nodded against his chest. Mommy would want you to take care of us. She told me once that you were the best thing that ever happened to her. Well, after me and Sophie. Marcus smiled through the tears he'd been holding back. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. Her and you two. Even though we're not really yours? What are you talking about? You're absolutely mine. You've been mine since the day I met you. Blood doesn't make a family. Love makes a family. Like how Mr. Trunks isn't really an elephant, but Sophie loves him so much he might as well be. Exactly like that. Emma yawned, a huge jaw-cracking yawn that made Marcus realize how exhausted they both were. Can I sleep in your room tonight? Me and Sophie? We don't want to be alone. Of course. Go get your sister. A few minutes later, they were all piled into the master bedroom, the bed Marcus had shared with Jennifer and now seemed impossibly large and empty. Emma took the left side, Sophie. The right, and Marcus in the middle, a girl tucked under each arm. Tell us a story, Sophie mumbled sleepily. One of the good ones. Marcus thought for a moment, then began. Once upon a time, there was a man who thought his life was complete. He had a good job and a nice house and everything he'd ever worked for. But he was missing something, even though he didn't know it yet. What was he missing? Emma asked, though she probably already knew where the story was going. A family, Marcus said. And then one day he met a beautiful woman who had 2 amazing daughters, and suddenly his life wasn't just complete, it was perfect. Because the thing about families is that they don't always come in the packages you expect. Sometimes you find the people you're meant to love in the most surprising places. Like at your old workplace, Sophie said. That's where you met Mommy. Exactly. What happens next in the story? Emma asked. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Well, something very sad happened. The beautiful woman had to go away, and the man and the two daughters thought their family might be over. But then they realized something important, that the love they had for each other was strong enough to carry them through anything, even the hardest things, even losing someone they loved so much. So they stayed together? Sophie asked. They stayed together, Marcus confirmed. And they lived happily ever after? Emma interrupted. Marcus paused. He could have said yes, could have given them the fairy tale ending, but that felt like a lie, and he'd promised himself he would never lie to these girls. Not happily ever after, he said honestly, because there's no such thing as ever after. There's just today and tomorrow and the day after that, and some of those days will be happy, and some will be sad, and some will be both at the same time, but they'll face all those days together, and that's what matters. That's not a very good ending, Sophie said, but she was smiling a little. Maybe not, but it's a true one. They lay there in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the radiator clank and all the familiar sounds of the house settling around them. Marcus thought they'd fallen asleep, but then Emma spoke one more time, her voice barely a whisper. Daddy? Yeah, sweetheart, thank you for keeping us. Marcus had to wait a moment before he could speak past the lump in his throat. Thank you for wanting me to keep you. Always, Emma murmured, already drifting off. Always, Marcus echoed. Outside, the snow continued to fall on the city they called home, in the courthouse where a judge had signed papers that made them officially a family, on the cemetery where Jennifer rested under a blanket of white, on the house where three people who loved each other were learning how to be okay again. It would be a long road, Marcus knew that. There would be hard days ahead, days when the girls cried for their mother, days when Marcus felt overwhelmed and inadequate, days when the weight of single parenthood would feel crushing. They'd need therapy and patience and time to heal. The grief would never completely go away, they'd just learn to carry it better. But they'd face it together, all three of them. A family not by blood or law or marriage, but by choice and love, and the simple, stubborn decision to hold on to each other even when everything else had been lost. As Marcus finally drifted off to sleep, he made a promise to Jennifer, wherever she was. I'll take care of them. I'll love them enough for both of us. I'll make sure they know how much you love them. And I'll never let them doubt that they are wanted and cherished and home. The snow fell. The city slept. And in a house in Boston, a family battered but not broken, grieving but not giving, upheld onto each other through the longest, coldest night of their lives, trusting that eventually, inevitably, morning would come.